everybody, live in our studio audience and those of you out there in television land. This is John Duane, partner with BrookBridge Private Wealth in affiliation with LPL Financial, and we're thrilled to have you join us today for a discussion on advisory teams for families, businesses, and tribes. Please welcome our co-host, our guest panelist, our featured star. He is a professional colleague of mine. He's also a good friend. He is the attorney telling terrific yarns. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Barnes.
Thank you very much, John. It's great to be here.
Thank you for joining us, Stephen. So there are some people in the audience that know you very well, probably some that don't know you as well as I do. For those that don't, please give us just a little bit on your background and your fantastic law firm, Barnes Law, and your fantastic practice, which is actually kind of unique when you take a look at it relative to some of the other work out there. So please tell us.
Yeah, thanks, John. You're way too kind. But yeah, I'm broadcasting here live from Nashville, Tennessee, actually Franklin, Tennessee. So we have an office here in Franklin. And then I used to work at Big Law for a while and never really enjoyed it. So in '03, started my own practice. And we do not do any litigation. We only do business transactional work for ultra high net worth families and organizations, including tribes. We love what we do because we get to see folks who are entrepreneurs and who are growing their businesses. We do that in three primary areas: expansion issues. So if a company or a business or a family is expanding, we do a lot of work there, succession planning, as well as protection planning. So that's kind of the law side. And then I am happily a co-founder of another business called Sitka Advisors, which my brother and I founded last year. And we set up advisory boards for growing companies.
Okay. That's interesting because you said transaction work, but somewhere in there, the reality is your own legal expertise has very nicely and easily morphed into expertise in financial planning, estate planning matters, and things like that. So it's not just straight kind of corporate attorney work. You're incredibly well versed in what I would refer to as estate planning matters.
Yeah, so over the years, we've sort of morphed into, and intentionally, I would say, outside general counsel for successful businesses and families. And because of that role, we end up overseeing and helping with very, very interesting growth issues for companies. And some of that includes very high level tax planning and very high level succession planning. So we do have a fairly robust estate planning practice, and we get to interface with a lot of very, very smart people. So yeah, I enjoy that.
So that's where we jump in. So advisory teams for families, businesses, and tribes, and undoubtedly, well, we know that you're certainly a leader in many and a participant in more advisory teams for these folks and these entities. So let us start off with the obligatory, easy for me to think, more difficult to say, definition. What is, in your estimation, an advisory team?
Well, it's a good question. And the word advisor has a lot of different meanings. But when we think about an advisory team, the way I couch it is folks, professionals who are experts in their field that provide guidance to organizational or family or tribal leaders. So the hero of the story, Frodo taking the ring to Mount Doom, for example, would be the family leader or the business leader, the founder, the next gen. But I'm not the hero of the story, but hopefully one day we'll be a Gandalf, or maybe we'll be a Sam, or maybe we'll be an Aragorn. That's the way I couch an advisory team. They're not the hero of the story, but they're helping the leadership move to the next goal that they have.
Okay, so
that makes sense?
One thing that does. And let's get one thing out of the way right now. If you think about a business, it's easy to envision and think about right away the board of directors. And we're not talking about that. Let's very quickly and efficiently understand why we're not talking about a board of directors and how that's different.
Yeah, it's a great question. So when I use the term board, oftentimes people immediately think about a board of directors, and the board of directors typically under state law is a delegated authority that has fiduciary obligations to the business. And all those big words, all that means is they can make decisions on behalf of the company. They have delegated authority from the shareholders to hire and fire people, for example, to deal with compliance obligations, to steer the company in a particular direction. They have ceded authority. And that authority is, if they say yes, that's what's going to happen. If they say no, then that's what's going to happen. That's different than an advisory board or an advisory team that does not have that kind of power to say, when we say you're going to do this thing, you're going to do that thing. Does that help you understand the two?
Yeah,
Differentiate the two?
one of the questions I would ask is how, and I'll readily admit that other people on the call might know this more than I do, but to what extent is the nature of the board permanent versus the ability for an executive or a family that controls a family-owned business to be able to remove the board? In other words, you talk about some very specific ceded, delegated fiduciary responsibilities, but to what extent does the family or the owners of the business have the ability to just say, well, just screw this, I'll just get rid of the board?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's several other questions behind that question. For example, how much ownership interest does the family member or family members have? Because typically speaking, and again, this is just general, I'm not giving legal advice, this is general, the board of directors serves at the behest of the shareholders. So the shareholders have the obligation to actually elect or appoint the members of the board of directors. The board of directors then, often in most states that we interface with, has the responsibility to, for example, hire the CEO or hire the CFO or vice presidents and things like that. So to answer your question, we would need to know, how much does the family own of the organization or the business in order to make that decision? Because remember, the board of directors is ceded authority by the shareholders, typically speaking. Again, that's
all right. So thank you for the clarification. So that's the board of directors. We're going to be talking about the advisory teams. Let's stay on the topic of businesses. So as somebody who, as I said, has led advisory teams for businesses and certainly been a member of advisory teams for businesses, this is not all encompassing, but what do you see as a typical standard composition of a business advisory team?
Yeah, so I usually see some main members of that team being legal partners. So that would be corporate counsel. It could be a transaction counsel, M&A counsel, things like handling contracts and corporate law and stuff like that. Could also be litigation. In certain types of businesses, they really need a litigator to help with navigating those things. Accounting partners would be crucial in there, folks who can understand tax, financial issues for the business. Then we have things like risk management, insurance. We have sales and marketing. We have 401k. So I put that under the financial side. Those are sort of the main thematic areas. But then I would also
as well.
Go ahead.
The banker,
a commercial banker. Yeah, the commercial banker. Folks who can assist with loans and lines of credit and such. Very important.
Okay, and then that's businesses. I imagine for families, there's going to be similarity, but maybe different flavors. So on the family side, advising the advisory team for these families, and I'll use the phrase, wealthy families, doesn't need to be business owners. The CEO of XYZ could have a family advisory team, et cetera. There are what I refer to as legacy wealth, folks that are wealthy because they've been wealthy for hundreds of years. So there are those folks. Those families are going to have advisory teams that will have similar players, but maybe with different titles. What's your experience there?
Yeah, I would see some intersection between the two. For example, CPA, wealth advisor, those types of things, but also, and even possibly other types of legal advisors. But then you would have specific things like estate planning advisors, folks that can take that succession plan for the individual owner of the company and move that in a family perspective down the line, those kinds of things. You might have next gen training, sort of mentor advisors, strategic advisors like that. You might even have family governance experts, folks who can come up with family constitutions, private investments, charity, philanthropic. You would need that kind of thing, and then even security. I mean, I've had families that had to deal with issues on the interwebs, and we had to engage advisors who were very skilled at dark web training or things like that, which I don't even understand any of that stuff. But they were very expensive and they were very good at what they did, and they erased entire cybersecurity issues immediately. So things like that, and then like a chief of staff too. You may have a chief of staff at a family level that would be taking care of that communication among the family members that have achieved wealth. And so those are the maybe some differences that you would see in a family.
And then how often do you see that memorialized or formalized through a family office structure versus, well, we don't have a family office, but I'm the principal and I kind of coordinate all of my team members?
I would say that family offices do a good job. The true family offices do a good job at trying to bring all that together. It's rare that a family has the time to just say, "Hey, let's hire somebody to do this one thing, like to be our mentor advisor." Or so a family office typically does a good job at bringing that to bear.
And as a team, deferring to the leadership of the family office, like is there a chief executive of the family office that we find is the chief coordinator, and we as a team kind of fall in line under the direction of the leadership of the family office?
Wow, that is a very good question. So, and this is just experiential, so it's anecdotal. I'm
Mhm.
not. I would say that typically the family office has a liaison, someone that serves as a liaison to the family, and then through that liaison relationship to the members of an advisory team. And often that's very loose. So it depends on the family, depends on the family office. Sometimes a family office will have their own strategic advisors in those different areas that we talked about before, wealth advisor, et cetera, or even law firm, estate planning. And so it just really depends. But usually there is a liaison between the family office and their services, which are outside, and the family.
That's always a question depending on, I would say, A, wealth, and B, complexity, the extent to which they want to build that infrastructure as in-house employees in the family office versus going out and, as an example, billionaire XYZ can hire 50 people to manage his or her own wealth, but at the same time, they could outsource that and, ideally work with BrookBridge Private Wealth, but,
There
work
you
with
go.
any number of wealth managers. You could build it in-house or
That's right.
outsource it at the end of the day, right?
That's right. And I would say that's really historically the origin of the family office. Originally, these were single family offices that were tasked with all these different things. The billionaire families were tired of going to so and so law firm, so and so CPA firm, so and so wealth firm, so and so insurance broker, and they had the capital to just bring them all in house, or at least have a single relationship with one entity that handled all of those issues. And so
Yeah.
that was the inception of the family office. Now, today, you have what we call multifamily offices, which would be offices that have that same capacity, but they serve multiple families, all the way down to folks who are wealth advisors or insurance advisors and such that have relationships with these other areas of expertise, and they bring in those people to help.
Yeah. I don't know if even you know this, but earlier in my career when I was with JP Morgan, I spent years in their family office global custody unit
Oh,
working
yeah.
exclusively with family offices. So when it's much more common now, back then it was a little less common. So when people asked me what a
Yeah.
family office was, I used to say, well, Bill Gates doesn't sit around in his robe on Saturday night paying bills typically. You know, he has
Right.
people
He doesn't
that
pull his checkbook out and you scratch
not that
away.
I'm not that I'm aware of anyway,
There's a
but
lot of checks, a lot of checks that he has to write.
so we talked about businesses, we talked about families. We both have the honor and privilege of working with Native American tribes throughout the land, and there are some unique elements to that. But and we'll get to some of that later. But with that comes some unique team members that you don't necessarily see just in working with traditional businesses or families. What do you see there?
Yes, I would say that working with tribes brings together a lot of complexity, the intersection really between family, enterprise, organizational things, as well as sovereign nationhood. So you're dealing with a sovereign nation. So you have things like intergovernmental affairs, advisory teams. You have tribal governance to determine things like economic development, energy policies, solar energy, other things like that. And then you have some other things like, considering ventures of the tribe that are outside their current region. So interfacing with other states, for example, or federal government entities. So there's specialized counsel associated with that. Um, so yeah,
Yeah, and I
it's very interesting.
And I've seen instances where the economic development advisor and a specific economic project consultant can be different. There could be an economic development advisor um, performing an analysis on the assets and strengths and resources of a tribe, and at the same time, if that goes in the direction of, as an example, a solar development, a dedicated solar advisor coming in and advising on and managing those projects.
100%. So when the need comes for some particular expertise, then the tribe can engage a particular expert for that particular expertise. And that person works, or that group works in tandem with their economic development council or their chairman or whatever associated with that governing body.
Okay.
So
So we've talked about um, families, we've talked about businesses, we've begun to explore tribes, and one of the words that we have not used is coach. And we have seen as the professional advisor industry has evolved, we have seen the development and growth of coaches providing services in that space. So in your history and background, I have my own thoughts on this. Where do
yeah.
coaches fit in terms of a part of the advisory team? And how do you do?
In my experience, coaches serve a very important role in assisting folks, leaders in their particular function. I want to say a function. So they help the coached person be better at what their role is. And for example, I have relationships with business coaches, and all they do is engage with the CEO, for example, or the founder, first gen family member. And what they're trying to do is help that person be a better leader in line with the goals and the vision and the perspective of where they're heading, as well as the values that are the bedrock for the family business, for example. So they help the coached person be better at whatever it is. I've also seen coaches serve in more of a group setting where they will engage with the strategic leadership team, and they will assist that leadership team, which each may serve in a different area of the business, for example, but they need to communicate back and forth with each other better. And so the coach can do that to help that leadership team, glue together better.
But here again, that's a scenario where the coach is helping the advisory team be a better advisory team.
That's true. I think a coach can serve a role on an advisory team, but I think it's usually in a particular function. Um, and there may be coaches that are broader and can think more about the trajectory of the business as a whole. And somebody like that has that acumen, I would want on my advisory team because they can maybe see the past, present, and future. So I think they have a good role to play, but I see them as functional.
Yeah.
um,
The way that I've always thought of it is if you think of uh, John Doe celebrity going on a concert tour, you have the concert tour director, you have the director of the and the producer of the event. Well, the director of the event could be different than the producer of the event, which would be the money behind it. But you have the director, you have lighting, you have the vocals in terms of on stage, and you have the dancers and things like that. But then that John or Jane Doe celebrity would have their own vocal coach, helping them to be the best vocalist as an
right.
example. So it's like the coach serves that function while at the same time, the coach wouldn't necessarily say, hey, the lighting should, look like this or be this. It's not the production, it's helping the singer in this instance be the best version of the singer that they could be. Does
Yeah,
that
I think
line up
that's a
with the way
great
you do
yeah, that's a
business?
great analogy. I like that. And like I said, both of those are important, but that coach is giving training for that particular function to make that person better at what they do. Like the
Yeah.
vocal coach, for example. Yeah.
So you've been on advisory teams, you've led advisory teams, and you have extensive experience there. What have you found in your history are some of the best practices that advisor teams bring to their interaction to make themselves the best advisory team, as you say, for the client, which is the star of the show?
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, number one, going back to the Frodo taking the ring to Mount Doom, is really understanding your place as an advisor. You're not the hero of the story, even though we sometimes think we are. We're not the hero of the story. And so I would say understanding, having that framework and that foundation is extremely important, because what that does is it creates what I call an other-centered approach.
Mm-hmm.
That other-centered approach means you care about the success of that client, whether it's the family, whether it's the tribe, whether it's the organization, the business, whatever it might be. You are there to serve, and that's very important. I think also it's that other-centeredness is, I want to say it's bilateral in the sense that it's directional toward the client, but it's also directional to the other advisors on the team. I think understanding that you're part of an ensemble rather than a soloist is amazing, and that's where you can really grow, help the founder or the leader grow best when you understand that other centeredness. That'd be one thing, and then also just best practices. I would say communication, 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 and that means coordination among all the advisors, so that the advisors know what the issues are that are outstanding, what are the things that are burning, what are the things that keep the leader up at night, for example. The advisors need to know that, and that comes through communication. So communication and coordination.
One of the things I did with clients in several instances is what I call a systems check call. So, depending on the client, it could be monthly, it could be quarterly, but it's the idea that we are going to get your team together on a consistent, regulated basis and have a call where we do a systems check. So, myself as the wealth advisor, the accountant, the insurance representative, in some instances, legal representation, while certainly not violating anything in attorney-client privilege. But very often the banker just going through and saying, hey, this is what's going on, this is where we are, we're checking in. That is a scenario where the client could be on the call or not on the call, and then somebody on the team is doing a collection and giving it back to the client. But I think it reinforces your point to the client knows that his or her team is gathering on a regular basis and making sure that everyone is aware of what's going on.
I agree with that 100%. There's got to be a regularity, and it's got to be baked into the advisory team rhythm so that, and it benefits the client and it benefits the advisor. So they're able to present and think through and tackle the main themes that the organization or the family or the tribe, whomever we're dealing with, really has top of mind. And without a system check like that, also, you may not know that the CPA talked to the client about a tax problem that we didn't understand, or that there's an HR issue, or whatever the case may be. And so having that regular pulse, we call it a pulse check in our world, where you're just checking in, making sure you understand,
Right.
and having that baked into the advisory team, just regular way of doing things is I think very, very, very helpful.
I think of it as before NASA does I'll use the phrase shuttle launch. They do a quick systems check and everyone says go flight, or they might say that they have a pause. But it's interesting when you talk about not being the hero. Anybody in the live audience or out there in television land that knows me personally knows that I speak in analogies very often. And there was a movie that me and about 7 other people saw called The Paper. It starred Robert Duvall and Glenn Close and Michael Keaton in a New York City paper, and Marissa Tomei. And actually, this is a really good cast now that I think about it.
I mean, I'm thinking, why haven't I seen this movie?
Jason Alexander was in it.
Wow.
Randy Quaid was in it. This is actually a really good, now that I think about it, a really good cast.
Crazy.
But anyway, Robert Duvall is the editor of the paper, and he's explaining to his reporters a story about covering celebrities and whatnot. And the moral is, we cover them. We're not them. We are not the hero of the story. We are there to tell it and give our viewers a look into it, or readers a look into it. But we are not the stars of the story. The stars are the ones that we're covering. And that's a very good analogy relative to what you're saying in terms of how we as advisors support our clients.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to have to go see that movie.
Yeah. We get to do some really cool things in doing it. But, when we ride on their plane, we're riding on their plane. It's not our plane.
That's a very good point. And and you get to live a little bit vicariously through these amazing people. But having that awareness, I think, is something that's special, because a lot of, and I'll call it out like it is, a lot of lawyers, so folks in my industry, have a tendency to want to show you just how much they know. And speak gobbledygook. Yeah, really, I can't believe it. Speak legalese. Yeah, could you? But it is very important, I think, to have that reflection and say, yeah, it's not my plane. Now, maybe there are some lawyers out there that have planes, but when you ride on your own plane, you probably have your own advisory team as well.
Yeah, and we should point out that Stephen Barnes is not the Barnes of Celino and Barnes.
That's very true. Yes, that is true.
All right. So we talked about best practices, but at the same time, every now and then, things do break down. What are the elements that you have seen in instances where the advisory team supporting the client breaks down? And by breaks down, I mean it doesn't function as well as it should function.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I'm going to start answering that question with a little bit of an anecdote. When an advisor on the team decides that he or she is going to bring in his friend who happens to sell insurance or do whatever it might be, into the mix at the expense of another trusted relationship on the team.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that happen, and that creates distrust, not just among the advisors, but between it creates a tension and a stress, which can cause a breakdown. Because remember, we're looking toward the client, and we want the best interests of that family, of that organization, of that business, of that tribe to be met. And so as we're moving forward, we need to be mindful of that, not, hey, let me help the relationship that I have with this other company or this college roommate or whatever it might be. So I've seen things like that, that create breakdown. And then I would also say sometimes it's outside of your control. For example, it may be inflection points in the state of the family or business or the organization where there's some new something that's happened. For example, in a family, it might be death or disability or some stress test of the succession plan that was unanticipated. Believe it or not, lawyers can't see the future, so we don't know what's going to happen next. So sometimes that happens, and there's a tax issue that nobody thought about, and so that creates stress. But usually, a good advisory team will bring in the right person to come in and think through that issue and deal with it. But that causes stress, those sorts of inflection points as well.
Uh, uh, Business enterprises, right? We serve clients, and we're always welcoming the opportunity to serve new clients and the right fit. And one of the things that naturally is the case is that when you're on an advisory team, there's the opportunity to partner and network with other members of the advisory team for additional business opportunities. And one of the things that I have found, and I'll, find I would love your thoughts on it, is the advisory team is a fantastic opportunity for new business opportunities derivatively. So what I have found is when you're out there marketing it doesn't work. But contrastingly to our earlier point, when you're just giving to it dedicated exclusively to the client, I have found in those instances that the partners have then seen that as, hey, this guy's doing, and this firm's doing a fantastic job in this capacity, and I'm on another advisory team where either that position is lacking or maybe not working as well. But it's not, hey, we work together on XYZ and I'd love an opportunity to blah, blah, blah. It's just more you're committed to your point, you're committed to the client, and that's going so well that someone says, I'm working over here and it's not working as well in that instance. And, with maybe the team and the enterprise's agreement, then an introduction is made. Do you find that?
I find that, yes. And I want to go back to the idea of being other-centered, but I always think about this in terms of a jazz ensemble. When you're listening to amazing jazz ensemble, you got the piano player and the bass player and the drummer and the trombone player and the trumpet player, and they're all amazing musicians. There's relational capital there, right? Everybody there is watching the whole thing. But when the piano player plays, and he's amazing, the other musicians step back. They're filling in the gaps. The bass player's doing his riffs, but he's not trying to overpower that person. And people love that. And there's relational capital there. And so, and then yeah. And then the bass player says, man, that piano player is incredible. And when he's talking to his other buddy, so that relational capital, I think, spills over. And that comes from being other-centered as well as being really good at what you do. And kind of to your point, just posting it on, a billboard or on LinkedIn or whatever else, that doesn't necessarily connect in the same way as when you have that relational capital and you've played that in that ensemble together.
One last thing on this. Do you find in your history of this that someone in there inherently or consequently becomes the leader of the team? Like maybe the CPA assembled the team, or the attorney assembled the team, and so now that person kind of becomes the point person? Or do you find typically it's the case that everyone's a little bit more just one spoke on the wheel? They get together their information and somebody gets it back to the family member, the business, or the tribal leadership?
Yeah, I'll go back to best practices, and then I'll tell you what I see. So the best practices are that you need to have coordination, and you need to have a facilitator. You need to have someone who understands the focus, the goals, the issues at hand, those sorts of things. That's very, very important on the advisory team or the advisory board. Now, that's best practices. In real life, what happens is there's less coordination going on, and it's sometimes project oriented, or if there's not a system check, like you said, or a pulse check, then they get lost in the shuffle and there's nobody that steps up. So I would say 50-50 in practice, how it actually happens. But
I got you.
the best way to do it is have someone who's appointed, someone who actually takes on that mantle, and someone that has that leadership capability and the time to do it, to help the entire team sort of move toward whatever the project goal is.
Okay. Good stuff. And I appreciate the distinction between personal experience and sometimes best practice. So
Right.
one of the unique elements of our practice and your practice is we both have the honor of working with Native American tribes.
Mm.
And we talked about um, how they could have you certainly consistent team members in relation to families or businesses, but at the same time, completely unique team members. And it is also the case that there are some unique elements just in what goes into the tribe experience. So let's talk about some of those. Where do you find some of the unique elements in what the tribe does every day in terms of how they manage themselves, organize themselves, communicate with the business community, et cetera?
Mm. Yeah, I would say that the tribe is a nation, and so it's got governing bodies that may not be that are unique to the tribe, and every tribe has different needs and different desires and different focuses. So you might have a governing policy body in one tribe that's not the same as another tribe, but things like economic development. You might have also a tribe that is engaging in uh, business opportunities in other states, for example, and they need particular help to not only from other legal counsel and things like that, but just understanding the political relationship between the tribe and that state. So there's economic as well as political counsel. So yeah, I would say it's unique because of the nationhood of the tribe.
That's certainly the economic and political slash government aspect of it. But one of the things that we talked about is working with Native American tribes who are essentially fiduciary stewards of the the money, the funds, the wealth that's generated by the economic activity of the tribes for the benefit of the tribal members, right? And
That's right.
the folks on the reservation. There's also that element of thousands of years of culture and history. So,
Very
in a
important.
lot of ways, while you have the economic aspects of the tribe, you have the bridge back because it is for the the stewardship of wealth management of the tribal members and the cultural experience of the tribe, which is
That's
unique.
right. It's very unique, and that culture is so important, and that's why often you have historical folks who are there to manage and maintain that history of the tribe, so that they can teach the next generation too. That's very important. So that educational bridge is extremely important in that tribal nation.
We're working with tribal council. We're working with a tribe's chairperson. Those are roles that, depending on the tribe, are elected for various terms. So there's that added element of leadership that, as we talked about, spans both government and fiduciary stewardship for the tribe.
That's right. I had a situation where a tribe was uh, doing some new work in a different state, and they have complete governing rules and regulations associated with their corporations that are different and unique and distinct from the federal or state level. And so, yeah, so you have all these unique opportunities for advisors to step in and really understand that history and that culture, and then implement it in a way that looks to the future.
Which leads to the question: best practice, because there are unique elements there. Best practices when being on an advisory team or an advisor for a Native American tribe, in your experience.
I would say first is an understanding and a knowledge of their cultural background and history is very important. And then a healthy respect and awareness of their tribal customs and just an awareness and respect for their culture is very important. And then because it's a tribe, which is a governing body, it's a government. And so there are things that may move at a different pace than dealing in a family business, for example, or dealing just with a family, with a wealthy family. So just understanding that culture as well as understanding sort of the fact that it's a governing body. And so there's a different pace to things.
I think respecting the pace is an important
I think that's
distinction.
right.
So,
Yeah, that's good.
so understanding, at least in some of my experience, that depending on how it works, you could be working with an executive at the tribe, like an administrator. You could be working directly with council or leadership, understanding that depending on the conversation you're having, it could be the kind of thing that starts at a committee, goes to council, is voted on, may find its way to a community meeting,
That's
all
right.
before ultimately it takes hands. And I think what I would say is respecting that
Yeah.
timeline as being an important part of their cherished process.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, respecting, having an awe actually for the reason why they have those processes in place is very
The
important.
reason why it's good. So one of the things that we touched on, and I'm excited to hear more about it, and for our studio audience and those in television land listening in, we talked about you had seen a gap in the advisory landscape and put something together that has the ability to helicopter in and be a solution there. Tell us about Sitka.
Yeah, Sitka Advisors. So, like you said, we noticed a gap in the market really over the last few years, and working with high net worth clients and family offices and family businesses and tribes and such. These folks have their fiduciaries, their board of directors, maybe their lawyer, their family lawyer, whatever. But there isn't a system typically in place for dedicated non-fiduciary advisory teams, advisory boards to help them, as a leader, see around the corner or figure out what other people are doing that are ahead of them in the growth phase. And so a few years ago, I started building out ad hoc advisory boards for a few of my clients as sort of a beta test. Watched a few as they were growing. And then my brother, Jonathan, and I, who Jonathan has a superpower. His superpower, he's got a deep network of people, and he's been doing executive staffing and recruiting and C-suite staffing for 20 plus years. He has a lot of folks on his network, as do I. We saw the opportunity to try to fill that gap, to try to meet that need, to bring structure, to bring really a curriculum of training for the advisory team, we call them guides, and sophistication, a foundation for advisory boards for these folks. And so we launched Sitka last April, and we call it Sitka. I'll just give you this. We're both musical people. We play instruments, and Sitka spruce is a very fine, beautiful tone wood that is used as the sounding board for guitars. And you see what I did there? Sounding board for guitars and pianos and violin, some violins. And so it's a strong wood, but it's also very tonal. It's resonating. And so that was the sort of the feeling that we wanted to have with these teams, these advisory boards, to be able to be strong, but also resonate, to understand the future direction of the company. And so we're trying to replace, random ad hoc kind of advice with a curated system, sort of a framework. And that's what we've done, developed. And so we've created a strategic sounding board called Sitka.
I like that. Strategic set. Now, is that a situation where, depending on the client, the members of the teams might be different? I kind of think of like Ethan Hawke. No, not the Ethan Hawke. Ethan, whatever his name is from Mission Impossible, assembling his team based on the mission.
Yeah, it's critical mission.
Ethan
Yeah,
Hunt.
Ethan Hunt. Yeah, also known as Tom Cruise. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it would be specific too, and that's why we start off with what we call a bridge, or it's really a clarity engagement where we do a deep dive with the client to really figure out. We do a scope analysis. We look at what's right in front of them, what's in the future, how to get there, we create a bridge basically, and then we do a working genius assessment. We do a lot of different things as we're thinking through who are the best people, who are the folks with the superpowers that will be able to engage. I really like your Mission Impossible theme there, because it's free, right? So to help them unlock their mission, to really get on mission and stay on mission. So that's how we. So there are different teams. Like, for example, our first client was interested in selling a portion of his business. And we learned that during the bridge as we were talking to him. And so to really maximize that and to tease that out, one of the guides on his advisory board is an M&A expert who's done this multiple times. Not a lawyer, just has been involved in that world multiple times, with lots and lots of zeros involved in the transactions that he's been in. So things like that are very particular to each client. So it's curated and it's specialized.
Okay. Before we wrap up, if you don't know, Sherlock Holmes had a brother that he referred to as his smarter brother, Mycroft. Now, is that the relationship between you and Jonathan?
Yeah,
Jonathan,
he's definitely. Yeah, he's
right.
definitely more handsome. He's definitely a better guitar player. I will say that.
Right. Well, for those of you in television land, I'm an only child, so it's just me. So, all right. So, Stephen, thank you for the overview of Sitka. Thank you for sharing with us your expertise and background on advisory teams. Certainly for all of you in the studio audience and those of you watching in television land, to reach out to Stephen, just reach out to me. I have his contact information. I'm more than happy to put in touch. So, Stephen, any last words or final notes that you want to share with the folks before we head out?
No, I just want to say thank you, John. This has been fun and exciting as always. Love chatting with you. And again, it's a really important space. And as an advisor myself, I know you're an advisor, just to really have that encouragement to engage in best practices for these amazing people that we help is great. So I'm glad you're doing what you're doing.
Someone who's on those teams and has a relatively expansive business network, very often the best relationships just come from the people that we work with, every day in this regard. So I appreciate it. So I want to thank you, Stephen, for your expertise. I want to thank those in our studio audience, those in television land, and those watching any of our replays. I want to thank you for participating. So again, my name is John Duane, partner with BrookBridge Private Wealth in partnership with LPL Financial. I want to thank you for joining us today as we talk about advisory teams for families, businesses, and tribes. Certainly reach out to me if there's anything we can do. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.